The wild sage perfumed the air as Nora Reeves knelt before the wooden cross. 3 summers had passed since they'd put Malcolm in the ground, yet the Wyoming earth still seemed unsettled beneath her fingertips. Or perhaps it was just her. Unsettled, unmoored. The last woman standing on the last parcel of the Reeves homestead. "Brought you sweet William today," she whispered, arranging the violet blooms at the base of the cross. "They're coming up wild by the creek bed now." The morning sun stretched long shadows across the small fenced graveyard. 2 crosses, one large one, cruelly small. She'd insisted on burying the baby here too, though there had been little to bury. A 20-week-old boy she had named Samuel after Malcolm's father. The doctor had told her the fall likely wouldn't have mattered, that something had already been wrong. But Nora knew better. The child had been perfectly fine until the moment she collapsed upon hearing the news of the mine. She spent a few more minutes there, pulling at the creeping thistle that threatened to overtake the fence line. A ritual that marked the beginning of each day. Some people prayed, some people drank. Nora Reeves tended graves. From this rise, she could see most of the Reeves property, the weathered 2-story farmhouse, the disused barn, the vegetable garden she had clawed back from the wilderness after months of neglect. The mountains rose around it all, like protective hands, an embrace or a trap depending on the day. Beyond the northern ridge lay the abandoned Silverbrook mine, the one that had taken Malcolm when the support beams gave way. The one they said was tapped out unprofitable, the one that 3 years later seemed to hold inexplicable interest for certain parties in Coleridge. Nora's gaze drifted to the horizon where dust bloomed. Riders approaching along the main road. She brushed the dirt from her skirt, set her jaw, and started down the hill toward the house. They were early today. "Mrs. Reeves." Maxwell Hargrove removed his hat as he dismounted. Behind him, 4 men remained on horseback, including the hulking figure of Silas Reed Hargrove's enforcer. "Lovely morning." Nora stood on her porch, arms folded across her chest. "Mr. Hargrove, your telegrams weren't enough. Now I'm to be graced with your presence before breakfast." Hargrove offered a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. At 50-something, he carried himself with the confidence of wealth and the backing of the territorial government. His tailored suit seemed absurdly formal against the rugged Wyoming backdrop. "I apologize for the early call, but Mr. Vance insisted on timely updates," he said. Harrison Vance. The name itself was like a splinter working its way under her skin. She'd never met the man, the railroad baron, who had purchased the mineral rights to half the territory and whose acquisitions seemed to grow by the day. All she knew was that he wanted her land and Hargrove was his well-paid bloodhound. "Nothing has changed since your last visit, Mr. Hargrove." My answer remains no. "Perhaps you'd reconsider if I told you the offer has been increased substantially?" He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. $5,000, Mrs. Reeves. Enough to start a new life anywhere you'd like. $5,000. More money than she'd ever seen. More than the land was worth by any reasonable measure. The ridiculous sum only confirmed her suspicions. "What's the rush, Mr. Hargrove? This land has been in the Reeves family for 30 years. Now suddenly it's so valuable it can't wait another week." Hargrove's smile tightened. "Progress doesn't wait, Mrs. Reeves. The territory's changing. The railroad is coming through Coleridge by year's end. Mr. Vance is simply being forward-thinking. The railroad's path is 10 miles south. We both know that." She shifted her weight, aware of the Spencer rifle just inside the door. Not that she'd need it, not yet. "Mrs. Reeves, Nora." Hargrove stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I understand your attachment to this place, but you're a woman alone. These mountains are no place for—" "I was born in these mountains, Mr. Hargrove. I'll thank you not to tell me where I belong." One of the riders, a younger man with a shock of red hair, snickered. Hargrove shot him a poisonous look. "The territorial court has already approved the development rights," Hargrove continued. "Mr. Vance is being generous, offering to purchase outright rather than simply exercising those rights." "My deed predates your court," she replied, "and any man who sets foot on this property without my permission will be treated as a trespasser." A flash of irritation crossed Hargrove's face. He replaced his hat, straightening it with deliberate care. "The world moves forward, Mrs. Reeves, with or without your cooperation. I'll return in 1 week. I suggest you use that time to reconsider your position. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. Good day, sir. Nora watched them ride away, the envelope still extended in Hargrove's hand unclaimed. Only when they disappeared around the bend did she allow herself to exhale, the tremor finally reaching her fingers. They would be back, and next time they wouldn't be so polite. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, Nora sat at her kitchen table reviewing Malcolm's old papers. Land deeds, mining claims, letters from his army days, fragments of a life truncated. 3 years, and she still found herself stopping to listen for his footsteps on the porch. She'd met Malcolm Reeves when he returned from the war. She had been 27, working as a schoolteacher in Coleridge, long resigned to spinsterhood. He had been 34, haunted but kind-eyed, with an unassuming quiet strength that drew her like a moth to flame. Their courtship had been brief, but certain, their marriage a surprise to everyone except them. For 5 years they had built something here. Not prosperity exactly, but a life with promise. Malcolm had occasionally worked the family silver mine, though the richest veins had been tapped years earlier. They'd planned for children, for expanding the house, for planting orchards along the eastern slope. Then the collapse, the funeral, the miscarriage, and the beginning of what Nora sometimes thought of as her second life, a shadow version of the first. There was a soft click from the front room. Nora froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the drawer where she kept a revolver. Mrs. Reeves, a woman's voice tentative. It's Abigail Morley. Nora relaxed slightly, though her heart continued to pound. In the kitchen, Abigail. The mayor's wife appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with concern. At 40-something, Abigail had the weathered beauty of a frontier woman, her once blonde hair now streaked with gray. I knocked, but... She gestured vaguely. It's fine. Nora stood. Tea? No, thank you. I can't stay long. Abigail glanced around nervously. James doesn't know I'm here. Mayor James Morley, another name on the growing list of men who seemed determined to see her gone from this place. What is it, Abigail? The older woman sat folding her hands on the table. Hargrove's men were in town today, drinking at Hamilton's. I overheard some things. Concerning things. A cold weight settled in Nora's stomach. Go on. Vance isn't just buying up land anymore. He's bringing in miners' equipment. They say there's a camp being established 10 miles east near the old Sullivan claim. Why the Silverbrook's been tapped for years. Malcolm knew it better than anyone. Abigail leaned forward. That's just it. They're not after silver. There's talk of something else. Something more valuable. She hesitated. James says the territorial governor himself signed off on the operation. That's why they're pushing so hard on holdouts like you. What could they possibly be looking for? I don't know, but Vance's company has brought in engineers from back east, people with government connections. Abigail reached across the table and squeezed Nora's hand. They're not going to take no for an answer, Nora. Not this time. I'm not leaving, Abigail. I understand your feelings, truly I do, but Malcolm wouldn't want you to. Don't. Nora pulled her hand away. Don't tell me what Malcolm would want. A pained expression crossed Abigail's face. You're right. I'm sorry. She stood. Just be careful. These men, they're used to getting their way. After Abigail left, Nora sat in the growing darkness. Something Malcolm had said once, shortly before the accident, drifted back to her. Some holes go deeper than others, Nora, and not all treasures shine like silver. At the time, she'd thought it was just one of his poetic observations. Now she wondered if he'd known something more. The next morning brought rain, a hard-driving downpour that turned the yard to mud and drummed relentlessly against the roof. Nora used the opportunity to mend clothes and take inventory of her supplies. If trouble was coming, she needed to be prepared. By midday, the storm had settled into a steady drizzle. Nora donned her oilskin coat and made her way to the barn where the roof had begun leaking again. As she worked to position buckets under the worst spots, a movement near the open door caught her eye. A man stood there, rain streaming from the brim of his hat, tall, broad-shouldered, with several days' growth of beard. For one impossible moment, her heart stopped, the silhouette so familiar it made her breath catch. But no, this wasn't Malcolm. The stranger's beard was darker, his build more solid. And Malcolm was in the ground with Sweet William at his grave. Who are you? She demanded, reaching for the pitchfork propped against a stall. The man raised his hand slowly. Don't mean to frighten you, ma'am. His voice was deep with an accent she couldn't quite place. Got caught in the storm. Saw your place and thought I might wait it out. You're trespassing. Yes, ma'am, I suppose I am. He remained perfectly still, seemingly unconcerned by the pitchfork in her hands. Name's Gabriel Wolf. Something in his calm demeanor gave her pause. He was soaked through, but his eyes, a startling pale blue, held steady on hers without menace or guile. There's a town 15 miles west, she said. Coleridge. They have a hotel. I know it. A slight smile. But I'm heading east. East, where Vance's operation was supposedly taking shape. You work for Harrison Vance? She asked bluntly. Surprise flickered across his face. No, ma'am. Can't say I've had the pleasure. She studied him more carefully. His clothes were worn, but of good quality. No visible weapons, though she suspected he carried something beneath his coat. There was a military bearing to him, a watchfulness that reminded her of Malcolm when he first returned from the war. What brings you east, Mr. Wolf? Looking for work. Heard there might be opportunities opening up. At Vance's mining camp, he shrugged. At whatever pays. Lightning flashed, followed by a growl of thunder that shook the barn's timbers. One of the buckets overflowed, sending a small stream across the dirt floor. Nora sighed, lowering the pitchfork slightly. Fine. Wait out the storm, but then you move on. Much obliged. He stepped further into the barn, removing his dripping hat. Beneath it, dark hair was cropped short at the sides, longer on top. A thin scar ran along his left temple. For several minutes they existed in uneasy silence as the rain pounded the roof. Nora relocated several of the buckets while keeping one eye on the stranger. Gabriel Wolf settled himself on a crate near the door, seemingly content to watch the rain. Leak's been there a while, he finally observed. Since last winter, she admitted. Wouldn't take much to fix it. Some tar paper, cedar shingles. Are you a carpenter now, Mr. Wolf? A ghost of a smile. No, ma'am, just handy. Another silence fell, more comfortable than the first. There was something oddly familiar about his presence, as if they'd met before, though she was certain they hadn't. You have a name, ma'am? He asked. Nora Reeves. This your place? It is. He nodded, taking in the barn with a slow, appraising gaze. Good land, protected from the northern winds. Water source nearby. You sound like you've seen your share of homesteads. Grew up on one, Nebraska territory. He turned his attention back to her. You're here alone. The question sent a small chill through her. My husband's buried on the hill, but I manage. If he noted the warning in her tone, he gave no indication. Sorry for your loss. The rain was slowing now, patches of blue appearing between the clouds. Gabriel Wolf stood replacing his hat. I appreciate the shelter, Mrs. Reeves. He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. If you should need any work done before winter sets in, I'll likely be around. She made no move to take the paper. I told you, Mr. Wolf. I manage. He studied her for a moment, then set the paper on a nearby stool. So you did. Without another word, he stepped out into the waning storm. Nora watched from the doorway as he made his way down the muddy path toward the main road, his stride unhurried but purposeful. Only after he disappeared from view did she retrieve the paper. It contained no name, no information, only a simple sketch of what appeared to be a cabin near a stand of pine trees. A location, presumably. She tucked it into her pocket, unsettled. Gabriel Wolf. The name meant nothing to her, yet something in those pale eyes had sparked a recognition she couldn't place. 3 days later, Nora woke to the sound of voices, urgent, angry. She grabbed the Spencer rifle and moved cautiously to the window. In the pre-dawn light, 6 men on horseback had surrounded a lone figure near the gate. Gabriel Wolf stood with his back to her house, hands raised slightly as Silas Reed Hargrove's enforcer loomed over him from horseback. Told you to clear out, Reed was saying, his voice carrying in the still morning air. This territory ain't for drifters. Free country last I checked. Gabriel replied, his tone maddeningly calm. Reed spat. Nothing's free, friend. Especially not around here. He nodded to 2 of his men. Search him. Nora cracked the window. Get off my property, she called out. All of you. The men turned startled. Reed's expression darkened when he spotted the rifle in her hands. This doesn't concern you, Mrs. Reeves, he called back. Just cleaning up some trash. I decide what's trash on my land, Mr. Reed, and right now you and your friends are the only garbage I see. A tense silence followed. Gabriel hadn't moved, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances. The two men who had dismounted hesitated, looking to Reed for direction. Mr. Hargrove won't be pleased to hear you're harboring vagrants, Reed said. Mr. Hargrove doesn't dictate who crosses my threshold. Nora leveled the rifle. Now leave. Reed's hand hovered near his holster, but something in Nora's stance must have given him pause. After a moment, he jerked his head to his men. We'll be back, Mrs. Reeves. Count on it. He glared at Gabriel. As for you, you just made a powerful enemy. They wheeled their horses around and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Nora kept the rifle raised until they were well out of sight, then slowly lowered it, suddenly aware of how badly her hands were shaking. Gabriel turned toward the house, his expression unreadable. For a long moment they regarded each other across the yard, Nora at the window, Gabriel by the gate. Finally he touched the brim of his hat in a small salute. Thank you, Mrs. Reeves. I don't need your trouble, Mr. Wolf. No, ma'am. It seems you have plenty of your own. He glanced in the direction the riders had gone. Those men won't forget this. I don't scare easily. He studied her with those strange pale eyes. No, I don't suppose you do. A pause. May I approach? I'd rather not shout this conversation across your yard. Nora hesitated, then nodded once. She watched as he walked toward the house, his gait measured, alert. There was something in his manner, a coiled readiness, that spoke of more than just a drifter looking for work. When he reached the porch, she opened the door but kept the rifle visible. I meant what I said, she told him. I don't need your trouble. Understood. He glanced at the rifle, a hint of appreciation in his eyes. You handle that like you know how to use it. I do. Good. He leaned against the porch railing. Those men, they work for Hargrove. Yes, Silas Reed and his crew. They've been pressuring folks to sell land to Harrison Vance. And you've refused. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. This is my home. Gabriel nodded as if confirming something to himself. Mrs. Reeves, I think we need to talk. There's more going on here than a simple land grab. I'm aware of that, she replied coolly. The question is, how are you? He met her gaze directly. Because I knew your husband. The words hit her like a physical blow. What, Malcolm Reeves? We served together during the war. 7th Kansas Volunteer Cavalry. He paused, allowing the information to sink in. That's why I'm here. Nora felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her grip tightened on the rifle. Malcolm never mentioned a Gabriel Wolf. He wouldn't have. I went by a different name then. A chill ran through her. Who are you really? The name's still Gabriel. Gabriel Nordstrom. Wolf was my professional name for a time. He straightened up, his expression grave. I was a scout for the Union Army, later for the Pinkerton Agency. Malcolm saved my life at Baxter Springs. I owe him a debt. Malcolm has been dead for 3 years, she said, her voice hollow. Any debt died with him. Maybe. Gabriel's gaze drifted to the small cemetery on the hill. Or maybe it transfers to those he left behind. Nora studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Gabriel Nordstrom. The name did sound vaguely familiar, though Malcolm had spoken little of his war experiences. What do you want, Mr. Nordstrom? To help you understand what you're up against. He turned back to her, his expression solemn. Harrison Vance isn't just after your land, Mrs. Reeves. He's after what's beneath it. The mine is played out. Everyone knows that. Not the silver. Gabriel lowered his voice. Something else. Something the Confederates hid during the final days of the war. Something your husband knew about. The morning air suddenly seemed too thin. Nora gripped the doorframe for support. That's not possible. I wish it weren't. His eyes held hers. But I need to show you something. Something Malcolm left behind that may explain everything. Nora felt herself at a crossroads. Trust this stranger with his impossible claims, or send him away and face Hargrove's threats alone. The sensible choice was clear. And yet, how do I know you're telling the truth? She asked. Malcolm carried a pocket watch with an inscription, "To the man who sees beyond the horizon." It was from his father. Nora's breath caught. The watch was buried with Malcolm. No one outside immediate family would have known about the inscription. Come inside, Mr. Nordstrom, she said quietly. I believe we have much to discuss. As she stepped back to allow him entry, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that she had just altered the course of her life irrevocably, for better or worse remained to be seen. Gabriel sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. He had removed his coat, revealing a lean, muscular frame and a holstered Colt at his hip. More surprising was the faded Confederate uniform button pinned to his vest, an odd choice for a Union scout. Belonged to a friend, he explained, noticing her gaze. A reminder of what? That good men can stand on opposite sides of a line. He sipped his coffee. Malcolm understood that better than most. Nora settled across from him. You said you had something to show me. Gabriel reached into his shirt and withdrew a folded document yellowed with age and creased from frequent handling. He spread it carefully on the table. It was a map hand-drawn with annotations in faded ink. Nora recognized the general outline of the region, including the ridge where the Silverbrook mine was located. But there were markings she didn't understand, passages and chambers that extended far beyond the known workings of the mine. What is this? A map of the true Silverbrook, Gabriel said. Not just the silver mine your father-in-law worked, but a much older system of tunnels beneath it. Tunnels that predate American settlement. Nora frowned. Spanish explorers? Exactly. Gabriel traced a line on the map. In 1541, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led an expedition through parts of this territory. They were searching for the 7 cities of gold. Instead, they found silver and something else, something they considered far more valuable. What documents, records, proof of certain arrangements between Spanish authorities and tribal leaders, land grants that preceded American claims by centuries. Nora shook her head. I don't understand what this has to do with Harrison Vance or my husband. Gabriel's expression darkened. During the Civil War, the Confederacy was desperate for foreign recognition. They sent agents to Mexico with gold-seeking Spanish colonial records that might undermine Union territorial claims. If they could prove that parts of the Western territories legally belonged to descendants of Spanish settlers or allied tribes, they hoped to sway European powers to their cause. And these records were hidden in our mine. Not originally, they were stored in a Confederate depository in Texas. But as the war turned against them, a group of officers, including one who had prospected in this region before the war, moved the cache north, intending to retrieve it after things settled. But they lost the war, Nora said slowly. Yes, and most of the men who knew about the cache died, but rumors persisted. Gabriel tapped the map. Malcolm came across information during his service. After the war, he tracked down surviving sources, pieced together the story. I think that's why he returned to his family's land. To find these documents, Nora felt a flare of indignation. You're suggesting my husband married me as part of some treasure hunt? Gabriel's eyes softened. No, I think he fell in love with you and this place and decided that whatever lay beneath the ground was better left buried. But others didn't agree. Harrison Vance, among others. There are powerful interests who would prefer certain historical claims remain unexamined. Land that could be worth millions if development continues as planned would be tied up in courts for decades if these documents surfaced. Nora stared at the map, trying to absorb the implications. You're saying that my husband's death was no accident? Gabriel met her gaze steadily. The support beams in that section had been deliberately weakened. I'm sorry, Mrs. Reeves. I know this must be difficult to hear. A cold numbness spread through her. For 3 years, she had lived with the pain of Malcolm's death, the randomness of it, a particular cruelty. Now to learn it might have been deliberate. Why are you telling me this now, after all this time? Gabriel hesitated. Because the situation has accelerated. Vance has obtained territorial approval for extensive operations. He's bringing in equipment capable of accessing the deeper chambers. Once that happens, the documents will either be destroyed or used selectively to benefit certain interests. He leaned forward. Malcolm wanted to protect this place, not just the land, but the truth it contains. I'm here to honor that wish. By doing what exactly? By helping you find the cache first. With the original documents, you'd have leverage not just against Vance, but against the territorial government itself. Nora stood abruptly, moving to the window. The morning sun now illuminated her small homestead, the familiar landscape suddenly alien in light of Gabriel's revelations. "This is a lot to take in," she said finally. "I understand." Gabriel remained seated, giving her space. "Take whatever time you need. And if I decide I want nothing to do with any of this, if I take Hargrove's money and leave, then I'll respect your decision." His voice was quiet. "But I don't think that's who you are, Mrs. Reeves. Malcolm wouldn't have married a woman who runs from difficult truths." She turned to face him, anger flaring. "You know nothing about me or my marriage." "You're right, I apologize." He carefully refolded the map. "I'll leave this with you. Consider what I've said. I'll return tomorrow for your answer." As he stood to go, a floorboard creaked outside the kitchen window. Gabriel froze, his hand dropping to his holster. In one fluid motion, he moved to the wall beside the window, signaling for Nora to step back. "Someone's out there," he mouthed. Nora reached for the rifle she'd left propped against the table. Before her fingers could close around it, the window shattered inward, and the kitchen erupted in chaos. A shotgun blast tore through the space where Gabriel had been standing moments before. He drew his Colt and fired twice through the broken window. A scream came from outside, followed by shouts and the sound of running boots. "Get down!" Gabriel ordered, pushing Nora toward the floor as another shot splintered the doorframe. She scrambled beneath the table, heart pounding in her ears. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Gabriel moved with practiced efficiency, taking position at the intact part of the window. "3 men, maybe 4, he said quietly, coming around to the front. "Who?" "Hargrove's men, most likely. He or they." He checked his revolver. "Though I doubt he sanctioned this level of aggression. This is Reed acting on his own." The front door burst open with a crash that shook the house. Heavy footsteps pounded through the front room. "Mrs. Reeves," Reed's voice bellowed, "we need to have a conversation about your guest." Gabriel caught Nora's eye, gesturing toward the back door. She shook her head, unwilling to flee her own home. "You've made a mistake, Reed." Gabriel called out, his voice eerily calm. "Walk away now and we can forget this happened." A harsh laugh. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Wolf, or whatever your name really is." "You'd be surprised," Gabriel replied. In a lower voice, he added to Nora, "When I move, stay low and head for the root cellar. Understand?" Before she could respond, Gabriel stepped into the doorway between the kitchen and front room, Colt raised. "Drop your weapons, gentlemen. This doesn't need to go further." Nora couldn't see Reed and his men from her position, but she heard the cold amusement in Reed's reply. "You first." What happened next occurred with such speed that later Nora would struggle to piece it together. Gabriel fired the sound deafening in the confined space. Someone shouted in pain. Return fire splintered the doorframe where Gabriel had been a split second before as he rolled to the side. Nora found herself moving not toward the root cellar, as instructed, but toward the drawer where her revolver was kept. Her fingers closed around the grip just as Reed burst into the kitchen, blood streaming from a gash on his cheek where a wood splinter had caught him. "There you are," he snarled, raising his pistol. Time seemed to slow. Nora saw every detail with crystalline clarity, the tobacco stains on Reed's teeth as he grinned, the way sunlight caught dust particles disturbed by the commotion, the small photograph of Malcolm that had fallen to the floor in the chaos. She raised her revolver. Reed's eyes widened in surprise. And then Gabriel was there, throwing himself into Reed with enough force to send both men crashing against the stove. Reed's gun discharged the bullet, embedding itself in the ceiling. Gabriel's fist connected with Reed's jaw once, twice. The larger man slumped unconscious. In the sudden silence, Nora became aware of moaning from the front room. Cautiously, she moved to the doorway. 2 of Reed's men lay on the floor, one clutching his shoulder where Gabriel's bullet had found him, the other dazed from an apparent blow to the head. "There were 4?" she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "The 4th ran." Gabriel was breathing hard, a cut above his eye, bleeding freely. "We need to go. Now. They'll be back with reinforcements." Nora looked around at her home, the shattered window, the splintered door, the overturned furniture. Everything she had fought to preserve for 3 years, suddenly unsafe. "Where?" she asked. "I have a place. Remote. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." Gabriel quickly gathered the map and a few scattered papers from the floor. "Pack only what you need. We have maybe 20 minutes. As he moved to secure the wounded men, Nora stood rooted in place, the revolver still in her hand. The weight of Gabriel's revelations pressed in on her, along with the visceral reality of the attack. Malcolm's death, the hidden documents, Harrison Vance's true motivations, it was too much to process at once. But one thing was clear, her life on this land, as she had known it, was over. With mechanical precision, she began to gather essentials: clothes, her husband's pocket watch, which she had removed from his body before burial. Despite her earlier statement, the small box of letters she kept beneath her bed. As she worked, a strange calm descended over her, the eye of a storm she had been unknowingly circling for 3 years. When Gabriel returned, she was waiting by the back door, a single satchel in hand, and the Spencer rifle across her back. "Ready?" he asked. Nora took one last look at the kitchen where she and Malcolm had shared meals, planned their future, built their brief life together. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said. "I believe I am." They slipped out the back door and into the bright morning sunlight, leaving behind the echo of shattered glass and broken promises. As they made their way toward the cover of trees at the property's edge, Nora felt a strange liberation, as if she were finally awaking from a 3-year slumber. The truth, however painful, was preferable to comfortable lies, and whatever lay ahead, at least she was moving forward at last. The cabin nestled against the mountainside like a secret. Built into a natural depression half hidden by pines, it would be nearly invisible to anyone passing through the valley below. Gabriel led Nora up a barely discernible trail as evening descended, shadows stretching long across the rocky terrain. "Who built this place?" she asked, breaking the silence that had persisted for most of their journey. "I did." Gabriel glanced back at her. "4 years ago, after the war, I needed somewhere apart." The cabin itself was small but sturdy, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and windows positioned to provide views of any approach. The deliberate planning behind its construction was evident in every detail. "You said you were a scout," Nora observed as Gabriel lit a lamp. "This seems more like a fortress." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Old habits." He moved with practiced efficiency, starting a fire, retrieving supplies from hidden compartments. Nora watched him, trying to reconcile this capable, guarded man with the one who claimed to have known her husband. "You and Malcolm," she said finally. "You never explained exactly how you knew each other." Gabriel paused in his work. "We met at Fort Leavenworth in '62. I'd been doing reconnaissance behind Confederate lines, information gathering mostly. Malcolm was assigned as my handler for a time." He resumed, arranging kindling in the fireplace. "He had a way of seeing things clearly. Moral things. Even in war." "That sounds like him." The familiar ache in her chest intensified. "He never spoke much about those days." "Most don't." The fire caught, casting Gabriel's face in flickering light and shadow. "Some memories are best left buried." Nora moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. From this elevation, she could just make out the distant silhouette of her home, or what had been her home. Smoke still rose from the chimney, a strange comfort in its normalcy. "They haven't burned it," she said quietly. Gabriel joined her at the window. "They won't. Not yet. They want people to think you'll return." He hesitated. "Mrs. Reeves, Nora, there's something I need to tell you about Malcolm. About his death." She turned to face him, steeling herself. "Go on." "I wasn't entirely forthcoming earlier." His eyes, those unsettling pale blue, held regret. "I didn't just know about the sabotage of the mine. I was there in Coleridge when it happened." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy as a storm cloud. "You were in Coleridge 3 years ago." Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. "Why didn't you—" "I arrived too late." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I'd been tracking rumors about Vance's interest in the area. By the time I pieced together what they were planning, the collapse had already happened. And you just left." Anger flared, sharp and sudden. "You knew it wasn't an accident, and you said nothing." "I had no proof. Only suspicions." He moved away from the window, his shoulders set in a rigid line. "And revealing myself then would have accomplished nothing. These men, they're connected to territorial officials, railroad barons. They have resources I couldn't counter alone. So you waited 3 years while I buried my husband and lost our child." The words tore from her throat, raw with long-suppressed grief. Gabriel flinched as if struck. Your child, I didn't know. A boy, Samuel. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire's warmth. The doctor said the shock of Malcolm's death. She broke off, unable to continue. I'm sorry. The simple words seemed woefully inadequate. If I had known, it wouldn't have changed anything. She moved to the table, needing distance. What changed now? Why return after all this time? Gabriel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality, harder, more determined. 6 months ago, a former Confederate officer named Edwin Caldwell was murdered in Denver. Officially a robbery gone wrong, but Caldwell had been making inquiries about land grants dating back to the Spanish colonial period. He reached into his coat and withdrew a journal. This was found among his belongings. It contains coded references to the Silverbrook cache and to Malcolm. Nora took the journal with trembling hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the entries cryptic, but there on the last page was a crude drawing of the Reeves property with X marks indicating the mine entrance and what appeared to be secondary tunnels. After Caldwell's death, Vance accelerated his plans. Gabriel continued. He secured territorial approval for an extensive mining operation, ostensibly for silver, but the equipment they're bringing in is designed for deeper excavation. I believe they've finally located the precise position of the hidden chamber. And the documents inside, they're truly that valuable, potentially worth millions to the right interests. Some of the land grants cover areas now slated for railroad development. Others involve mineral rights currently being exploited by Eastern corporations. He took a breath. But more than that, they represent a historical record that certain people would prefer remain buried. Nora closed the journal, her mind racing. You said Malcolm knew about this, that he chose to leave it buried. Yes. After the war, he spent time researching Confederate activities in the West. When he realized what might be beneath his family's land, he had a choice: exploit the knowledge or protect it. Gabriel's expression softened. He chose protection, even from me. What do you mean? A shadow crossed Gabriel's face. The last time I saw Malcolm before the war ended, we argued. He'd discovered certain actions I'd taken during my scouting missions, things that crossed lines he wouldn't cross. We parted on bad terms. Understanding dawned slowly. That's why you never came to see me after his death. You thought I knew about your falling out. I thought he would have told you to beware of me, Gabriel admitted. Malcolm was many things, but he was never one to keep dangerous truths from those he loved. The revelation settled between them, altering the fragile trust that had begun to form. Nora studied Gabriel with new eyes, seeing the weight of past actions in the set of his shoulders, the careful distance he maintained. What actions, Mr. Nordstrom? She asked quietly. What exactly did Malcolm discover about you? Gabriel met her gaze unflinchingly. During the war, I was tasked with infiltrating Confederate intelligence networks. I became effective at gaining trust, extracting information, and eliminating threats. His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes changed, a door closing. Malcolm learned that I had orchestrated the death of a Confederate officer, made it look like an accident to protect an ongoing operation. The man had a family, children. The clinical way he described it sent a chill through Nora. You were an assassin. I was a soldier following orders. No defense in his tone, merely statement of fact. But Malcolm saw it differently. To him, some lines shouldn't be crossed even in war. Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Outside, an owl called into the gathering darkness. Why tell me this now? Nora finally asked. Because you deserve the truth. And because if we're going to find the cache before Vance does, you need to know who you're working with. Gabriel moved to the fireplace, adding another log. I'm not the man Malcolm knew during the war. But I'm not a good man either, Mrs. Reeves. I want you to understand that from the start. There was something oddly honorable in his confession, a refusal to present himself as better than he was. It reminded her painfully of Malcolm's straightforward nature. I appreciate your honesty, she said carefully, but I need time to process all of this. Of course, he gestured to a curtained alcove. You can rest there. We're safe here for tonight at least. As she prepared for sleep exhaustion, finally overtaking the day's tumult of emotions, Nora found herself dwelling on Gabriel's revelations. The man who had killed with calculation during the war was the same one who had built this hidden sanctuary, who had come to warn her about Vance, who carried the weight of his past actions without excuses. Just before sleep claimed her, a memory surfaced Malcolm at their kitchen table, a distant look in his eyes as he spoke of the war. The trouble with judging a man, Nora, is that we so rarely see the whole picture, just fragments filtered through our own understanding. Dawn broke cold and clear, bathing the mountains in golden light. Nora woke to the smell of coffee and found Gabriel at the table, the map from yesterday spread before him, making additional notations with a pencil. "You've been busy," she observed, accepting the cup he offered. "Plotting the most likely location for the Spanish chamber based on Caldwell's journal and Malcolm's notes." He indicated a section of the map where the tunnels converged. "It's deeper than the existing mine workings, but accessible through one of the abandoned shafts." Nora studied the markings. "That's the western section where Malcolm died." Gabriel nodded grimly. "Not a coincidence. You think he found something, that's why they killed him?" "Possibly. Or they suspected he was getting close." Gabriel traced a path on the map. "The tunnel collapsed here, sealing off this entire area. A deliberate act, in my view, designed to hide evidence and create the appearance of a natural accident." Nora's hand trembled slightly, coffee spilling over the rim of her cup. "If we're right, if Vance murdered Malcolm, we need proof. Something that will stand up in territorial court. The documents alone might not be enough, but combined with Caldwell's journal and testimony from others who've been pressured by Vance," Gabriel's expression hardened, "it could be enough to bring scrutiny at least." "What about the documents themselves, Spanish land grants from centuries ago? Would they still hold legal weight?" "Some would, yes. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo guaranteed that property rights established under Spanish and Mexican rule would be respected by the United States." He leaned back, considering. "But more importantly, these documents would reveal how certain current land claims were obtained through fraud, deception, or outright theft. That kind of revelation could upend powerful interests." "What's your—" They spent the morning reviewing the maps, planning a route into the abandoned mine that would avoid detection by Vance's men. By midday, a strategy had begun to take shape, risky, but potentially workable. "We'll need supplies," Gabriel said, "and information about Vance's current operations. I'll go into town tonight, see what I can learn." "Not Coleridge," Nora warned. "Reed and his men will be watching for us there." "No, there's a smaller settlement east of here, Grayson's Pass, less connected to Vance's influence." He folded the map carefully. "We also need to consider what happens after we find the cache." "What do you mean, Aaron? These documents, they're valuable because they're unknown, unexamined. Once brought to light, they become targets." He regarded her seriously. "Are you prepared for what might follow? Legal battles, powerful enemies, possibly worse?" Nora hadn't considered the longer implications, too focused on the immediate goal of exposing Vance and obtaining justice for Malcolm. Now faced with Gabriel's question, she found herself confronting deeper motivations. 3 years ago, when they brought Malcolm's body home, the mine owner, Hargrove's predecessor, offered me compensation. Called it a widow's comfort. $200 in assurances that my husband died a hero. Her voice hardened. "I took the money because I needed to survive, but I never believed their story, never stopped feeling that something wasn't right." She moved to the window, gazing out at the vast, indifferent landscape. "I'm not doing this just for Malcolm anymore," she continued. "I'm doing it because men like Vance believe they can rewrite history to suit themselves, that truth is whatever they decree it to be. That needs to end." Gabriel studied her with an unreadable expression. "Then we proceed," he said simply. Gabriel left for Grayson's Pass as evening approached, leaving Nora alone in the cabin with strict instructions not to venture outside or light more than one lamp. The isolation, so familiar after 3 years as a widow, now felt different, charged with purpose rather than mere survival. She used the time to examine Caldwell's journal more thoroughly, deciphering what she could of the cryptic entries. Most were written in a kind of shorthand with references to the treasure and Spanish holdings, interspersed with observations about various territorial officials and their susceptibility to bribery. One entry dated a month before Malcolm's death caught her attention. "Met with R today. He confirms unusual activity near Silver Creek. MR making inquiries that have raised concerns. HV wants situation monitored closely. Possibility of intervention discussed. MR Malcolm Reeves, HV. Harrison Vance. The evidence of premeditation was there in faded ink, written by a man who himself had later been silenced. As night deepened, Nora found herself drawn to the small shelf of books in the corner, a dozen volumes well worn. She ran her fingers along the spines: Thoreau, Whitman, Shakespeare, several on wilderness survival and tracking. The collection revealed something about Gabriel beyond his taciturn exterior, a mind seeking both practical knowledge and deeper understanding. Her attention settled on a small leather-bound volume nearly hidden between larger books. She withdrew it curiously, finding not a printed work, but a journal Gabriel's judging by the familiar handwriting. She hesitated, aware of the invasion of privacy reading it would represent. Yet if she were to trust this man with her life, with justice for Malcolm, shouldn't she know more about him? The earliest entries dated from 1865, just after the war. The writing was different then, more erratic, filled with dark reflections on his wartime actions and their cost to his conscience. Gabriel Nordstrom had been a haunted man, it seemed, fleeing as much from himself as from any external threat. Then an entry from 1867 caught her eye. Received word today that Malcolm Reeves has returned to Wyoming territory. Married now, they say, to a schoolteacher. Good. He deserves peace after what we endured. Still, the knowledge he carries, the things we discovered in those last months, remain dangerous. Should I warn him, or would my presence only draw attention he doesn't need? Sometimes I wonder if he was right about everything. About the lines we shouldn't cross even in war. About the corrupting influence of secrets. Better to stay away. Let him build his new life without the shadows of the past. Nora sat very still, absorbing the implications. Gabriel had known about Malcolm's return to Wyoming, had deliberately kept his distance out of concern for her husband's safety. Yet he had remained close enough to receive word of Malcolm's activities. She turned the page to find a stark entry from August 1872, the month of Malcolm's death. Too late. Always too late. The mine collapse was no accident, I'm certain of it. Followed Reed to a meeting with Hargrove. They spoke of regrettable necessity and loose ends. I should have warned him years ago. Pride and shame kept me silent, and now a good man is dead. His widow remains on the property, either unaware of its significance or more formidable than they anticipated. I'll watch from a distance. Intervene only if necessary. The cache must remain undisturbed until I can determine who else knows of its existence. The final entry was dated just 2 months ago. Caldwell's murder changes everything. They're moving faster now, assembling resources for a major operation. Vance himself arrived in Denver last week, first time he's personally overseen the project. Can no longer justify inaction. Time to make contact with the widow. Whatever Malcolm's feelings about me, he would want her protected. If this goes wrong, let the record show I tried at least to make amends. Nora closed the journal, her mind reeling. Gabriel had been watching over her for 3 years, a silent guardian motivated by guilt and a debt to Malcolm. He had known of the danger to her husband, but hesitated too long to prevent tragedy. It explained much about his appearance. Now his detailed knowledge of Vance's operations, the self-recrimination that seemed to underlie his every action. The sound of approaching footsteps startled her from her thoughts. She quickly replaced the journal and moved away from the shelf just as the cabin door opened. Gabriel entered carrying a burlap sack over his shoulder. His clothes were dusty from travel, his expression grim. News? She asked, fighting to keep her voice neutral despite her discovery. None good. He set down his burden, removing his hat. Vance's operation is larger than we thought. Nearly 30 men at the camp, heavy equipment arriving daily. They've started preliminary excavation at the mine. How long until they reach the hidden chamber? A week, maybe less. He unpacked the supplies, ammunition, preserved food, 2 lanterns. There's more. Mayor Morley has declared you missing, possibly dead. They're organizing a search party, all for show, of course. Hargrove is already speaking of the property as if it's been acquired. And read his men. No sign of them in Grayson's Pass, but I heard talk. Reed sporting a broken jaw, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. They've doubled the guard at the mine entrance. Getting in won't be easy. Nora absorbed this information, studying Gabriel with new awareness. We need a diversion, something to draw attention away from the western shaft. He raised an eyebrow, surprised by her tactical thinking. I had similar thoughts. The main operation is concentrated here. He pointed to the map. If we created a disturbance to the north, perhaps a controlled explosion in one of the played-out tunnels, it would draw their security in that direction. While we enter through the maintenance shaft on the south face, Nora traced the route with her finger, the one Malcolm used to use when inspecting the lower workings. Gabriel nodded slowly. It would be tight timing. We'd need to be in position before triggering the diversion, ready to move as soon as their attention shifts. Ha! When was tomorrow night? New moon. Minimal visibility. He studied her face. Are you certain about this? Once we begin, there's no turning back. Nora thought of the journal entries of Gabriel's years of silent vigilance, of the guilt that had finally driven him to action, of Malcolm who had chosen to protect dangerous knowledge rather than exploit it, of her child who would never draw breath in this world. I've spent 3 years looking backward, she said quietly. It's time to face what's ahead. Something shifted in Gabriel's expression, respect perhaps, or recognition of a kindred determination. He extended his hand in oddly formal gesture. Partners, then. She took it, noting the calluses, the strength carefully restrained. Partners. They spent the next day preparing checking equipment, memorizing the map, rehearsing their approach. Gabriel showed Nora how to handle the dynamite they would use for the diversion, explaining detonation procedures with the patience of an experienced instructor. As evening approached, they shared a simple meal, the weight of their impending mission creating a strange intimacy. For the first time since their meeting, conversation turned to lighter matters, memories of places they'd seen, books they'd read, small moments of beauty observed in harsh landscapes. Malcolm used to say that Wyoming had more sky than any place on Earth, Nora remarked, watching sunset colors paint the clouds outside their window. Gabriel smiled slightly. He said the same thing about Kansas. I think he just liked looking up. He did. The familiar ache in her chest had softened somehow, the memory bringing warmth rather than pain. He taught me the constellations during our first summer together. Said knowing the stars meant you were never truly lost. Sounds like him. Gabriel's voice held a wistfulness she hadn't heard before. He had that way about him, finding meaning in things others overlooked. You admired him. It wasn't a question, but Gabriel answered anyway. More than he ever knew. He hesitated, then added quietly, I envied him too. His certainty about right and wrong. His ability to leave the war behind. He didn't leave it all behind, Nora said. There were nights he'd wake shouting, names I didn't know, places I couldn't imagine. Gabriel nodded, understanding. The things that haunt us aren't always what others might expect. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Nora found herself studying Gabriel's profile in the fading light, the strong line of his jaw, the watchful eyes that seemed to hold the weight of too many secrets. I read your journal, she admitted suddenly. Gabriel stiffened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained calm. I see. I shouldn't have. It was a violation of your privacy. She met his gaze directly. But I needed to understand why you came back now, why you waited so long. For a moment she thought he might be angry. Instead, he simply nodded once. And do you understand? I think so. You believe you failed Malcolm, that your silence contributed to his death. She hesitated. You've been watching over me since then, protecting me from a distance. Not well enough, apparently. A shadow crossed his face. Reed and his men should never have reached your property. Why didn't you reveal yourself sooner? Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the dying fire. Pride at first, then shame. Later, I told myself you were safer without my presence drawing attention. His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. Convenient how our justifications often align with our cowardice. The raw honesty of his answer caught Nora by surprise. It wasn't cowardice to honor Malcolm's wishes to keep the cash hidden. Perhaps not. But watching from shadows while Vance's influence grew, while his men pressured you, he shook his head. I should have acted sooner. Well, you're acting now. Nora leaned forward, meeting his gaze. And so am I. Whatever mistakes we've made, whatever regrets we carry, they don't define what happens next. Things shifted in Gabriel's expression, a softening around the eyes, a release of long-held tension. For a brief moment, Nora glimpsed the man beneath the hardened exterior, the one who had once been Malcolm's friend, who had built this sanctuary against a harsh world. Your husband, he said quietly, would be proud of your courage. The simple statement, free of platitudes or hollow comfort, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to surrender to emotion on the eve of such danger. "Dawn comes early," she said, rising. "We should rest while we can." Gabriel nodded, turning his attention back to the fire. As Nora retreated to the curtained alcove, she felt a curious lightness, as if in naming their regrets, some burden had been shared between them. Sleep came easier than she had expected, deep and dreamless. When she woke, pale morning light filtering through the cabin windows, she found Gabriel already up his back to her as he stared out at the mountains. Something in his posture, a rigid alertness, sent a chill through her. "What is it?" she asked, rising quickly. "Riders." He nodded toward the valley below. "Coming up the eastern trail." Nora joined him at the window. In the distance, 5 mounted figures moved steadily upward through the pines. Even at this distance, she recognized Silas Reed's bulky silhouette at the lead. "How did they find us?" she whispered. Gabriel's expression darkened. "Someone in Grayson's pass must have recognized me, or they've been watching the approaches to the mine, spotted me returning yesterday." "What do we do?" He turned to her, decision already made. "Change of plans. We move now. In daylight, they'll see us. Not if we use the old game trail behind the ridge." Gabriel was already gathering their supplies, movements swift and precise. "It will add 2 hours to our journey, but it avoids the main paths. By the time they reach this cabin, we'll be halfway to the mine. And the diversion, we adapt." His pale eyes held a hard glint. "Instead of drawing their men away from the mine, we'll use Reed's pursuit to our advantage. You and I will separate temporarily. I'll lead them on a chase while you position yourself at the maintenance shaft." Nora felt a flicker of alarm. "Alone, Gabriel? I don't... You know the mine layout better than I do. You've studied the maps." He handed her a small revolver. "I'll circle back and join you at the shaft entrance by nightfall. But if I don't..." He hesitated. "If I don't proceed without me, find the cache. Use it to destroy Vance." The prospect of facing the mine alone, the place where Malcolm had died, where unknown dangers lurked, sent cold dread through her veins. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred: determination, purpose. "I will," she promised, "but you'd better be there." A ghost of a smile. "Count on it." They gathered only what was essential: the map, weapons, minimal supplies. Gabriel led her to a trap door, hidden beneath a bearskin rug, revealing a narrow tunnel that extended into darkness. "Where does this lead?" she asked, surprised. "Out through the hillside about 100 yards east. Old mine shaft I repurposed." He handed her a small lantern. "Another exit I never mentioned. You really did build a fortress. Experience has taught me the value of multiple escapes." He gestured for her to precede him. "Stay low when you emerge. The tree line provides cover most of the way down." As Nora descended into the cool darkness, she felt a strange calm settle over her. For 3 years she had been reacting to loss, to threats, to circumstance. Now at last she was moving with purpose toward truth rather than away from pain. Whatever waited in the depths of the Silverbrook mine, whatever secrets lay buried beneath layers of rock and deception, she would face it. For Malcolm, for Samuel, for herself. And perhaps, she admitted silently, for the complicated, haunted man who followed her into the shadows, carrying the weight of his own ghosts alongside hers. The separation came an hour later at a fork in the ravine where the terrain offered 2 distinct paths toward the Silverbrook property. "I'll draw them west," Gabriel said, checking his revolver one final time. "Make them believe we're circling around to approach from the far side of the mine." Nora nodded, studying his face, suddenly aware it might be the last time she saw him. Reed and his men were not known for mercy toward those who interfered with Vance's plans. "Be careful," she said simply. Something flickered in Gabriel's eyes, warm, almost tender. "You too, Mrs. Reeves." With that, he was gone, moving through the underbrush, with the silent efficiency of a man long accustomed to evasion. Nora watched until he disappeared from view, then turned east toward the abandoned maintenance shaft that had once been Malcolm's preferred entrance to the mine. The journey took longer than anticipated. Twice she was forced to hide as Vance's men patrolled the ridgelines, their presence confirming Gabriel's assessment that security had been increased. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered above the mountains, the promise of a storm adding urgency to her progress. When she finally reached the maintenance shaft, it was nearly dusk. The entrance, little more than a wooden door set into the mountainside, was partially obscured by years of neglect wild blackberry, creating a natural screen. Nora crouched behind a fallen log, scanning the area for any sign of Gabriel or their pursuers. Nothing. Only the rising wind and distant rumble of thunder. She checked her pocket watch, Malcolm's watch, the inscription worn smooth from her fingers, tracing it nightly. 7 o'clock. If Gabriel had been captured or delayed, she would need to proceed alone as agreed. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. Taking a deep breath, Nora moved toward the shaft entrance, using the gathering darkness as cover. The door's hinges protested as she eased it open, the sound masked by a well-timed thunderclap. Inside, the air was cool and damp, heavy, with the scent of earth and old timber. She lit her lantern, keeping the flame low, and began the descent into the mountain's heart. Behind her, the first raindrops struck the leaves outside the entrance, nature's percussion, accompanying her journey into the past. The maintenance tunnel narrowed as it descended, support beams appearing at regular intervals, some newer than others. Malcolm had personally overseen the reinforcement of this section, insisting on quality timber despite the added expense. His thoroughness had likely preserved this access, while other sections of the mine deteriorated. After 20 minutes of careful progress, Nora reached a junction where the maintenance shaft intersected with one of the main tunnels. According to the map, she needed to follow this larger passage westward, then descend a ladder to the lower level, where the Spanish chamber was supposedly located. She paused, listening. From somewhere deep in the mine came the distant echo of machinery, Vance's operation working despite the storm above. She would need to be exceptionally careful from this point forward. Checking the map once more by lantern light, Nora steeled herself and continued into the darkness, each step carrying her closer to whatever truth lay buried beneath the mountain's ancient stone. Unknown to her, Gabriel Nordstrom was at that moment engaged in a desperate struggle for survival. Reed and his men had caught his trail more quickly than anticipated, forcing him to abandon his plan to lead them away from the mine. Instead, he found himself cornered near an old hunting cabin, exchanging gunfire with Reed's posse as the storm intensified around them. As a bullet splintered the wood beside his head, Gabriel thought of Nora, now likely underground, moving toward danger with only his hastily provided instructions as guide. He had meant to be there to face whatever waited in the darkness beside her. Instead, he was here, blood seeping from a graze along his ribs, the odds mounting against him with each passing minute. "I'm sorry, Malcolm," he thought grimly as he reloaded his revolver. "I may have failed her, too." With that bitter acknowledgement, Gabriel Nordstrom prepared himself for what might be his final stand, while miles away Nora Reeves descended alone into the earth, unaware that her partner might never return to guide her back to the light. The deeper Nora ventured into the Silverbrook mine, the more the outside world receded, storm pursuit, even time itself, dissolving into the primal darkness. Only the small circle of lantern light remained constant, illuminating rough-hewn walls that had witnessed decades of human ambition and suffering. The main tunnel stretched before her, its dimensions gradually narrowing as she moved west. Support beams appeared at increasingly frequent intervals, many newer than the surrounding timbers, evidence of Malcolm's careful maintenance. The air grew thicker, heavy with mineral scents and the musty breath of the mountain. According to Gabriel's map, the access point to the lower chambers should be approximately half a mile from the junction, a vertical shaft with iron rungs embedded in the rock face. As Nora approached the estimated location, she slowed her pace, sweeping the lantern methodically across the tunnel floor and walls. There, almost hidden behind a stack of abandoned ore carts, a dark opening descended into the earth. Beside it, carved into the stone, a symbol she recognized from the map, a crude representation of a six-pointed star. The Spanish marker. Nora hesitated at the edge of the shaft, peering down into impenetrable darkness. The iron rungs disappeared into the void, their lower extent invisible. She secured her small pack, and the lantern took a deep breath and began her descent into the mountain's deepest secrets. The ladder seemed to extend forever, each rung slick with mineral-laden moisture. 20 feet down, 30, 40, just as Nora's arms began to tremble, from the strain her foot found solid ground. She raised the lantern, revealing a smaller tunnel that branched in two directions. The map indicated she should take the leftward path, the one that would eventually lead beneath the western section, where Malcolm had died. As she moved forward, the tunnel's character changed subtly. The walls here showed different tool marks, older, more primitive. This section had not been carved by American miners, but by much earlier hands. The air grew noticeably warmer, and the rock itself seemed to change texture beneath her fingertips. After perhaps 10 minutes of careful progress, the tunnel widened into a natural cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Nora's lantern light caught glints of crystal embedded in the walls, not silver, but quartz formations that fractured the light into prismatic patterns. At the cavern's center stood a stone altar of sorts, a flat rectangular slab supported by roughly carved pillars. On its surface, Nora could make out the eroded remains of Spanish inscriptions and religious symbols. This was it, the sacred chamber mentioned in Caldwell's journal. But where were the documents Gabriel had been certain they would be here, preserved in some kind of container, a metal box, or oilskin wrappings? Nora approached the altar cautiously, running her fingers along its edge. Nothing. She examined the floor surrounding it, searching for loose stones or hidden compartments. Still nothing. Frustration mounting, she raised the lantern higher, illuminating more of the cavern's recesses. There in the far corner, a dark opening, almost like a small doorway, leading to yet another chamber. Inside this smaller space, the temperature dropped noticeably. The walls were smoother here, worked by human hands rather than natural forces. And against the far wall, a wooden chest bound with iron bands. Nora's heart quickened. She moved toward it, setting down her lantern. The chest was approximately 3 feet long, its wood darkened with age but remarkably preserved in the cave's dry atmosphere. The lock, an intricate Spanish design, hung open, broken long ago. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside lay several oilskin packets, each tied with faded ribbon, alongside a small leather case, and what appeared to be a metal cylinder. Nora reached for the nearest packet, carefully untying the bindings that had secured it for over a century. The documents within were written in formal Spanish script, their edges crumbling slightly despite the protective coverings. Though Nora couldn't read the language, she recognized maps, official seals, and signatures. Dates from the 1540s marked some pages, while others appeared to be from later colonial periods. The leather case contained additional papers, these in English dated 1863. Confederate military dispatches with references to securing proof of prior claims and diplomatic leverage against the Union. As she carefully repacked these materials, Nora's attention shifted to the metal cylinder. Unlike the other items, this seemed out of place, more modern in construction, its brass surface unmarked by the passage of time. She unscrewed the top and extracted a rolled document, not Spanish parchment or Confederate dispatch, but a letter written on common stationery. With shock, she recognized the handwriting. Malcolm's. "My dearest Nora," it began. "If you're reading this, I fear the worst has happened. I've concealed this message in the one place I believe only you might eventually find it, guided by the clues I've left in my papers. What I'm about to share will seem impossible, perhaps even mad. But I beg you to read with an open heart and mind. The Spanish cash is real. The colonial documents, the Confederate communications all exist exactly as rumored. But there is a deeper truth, one I discovered only weeks ago while reinforcing the Western Shaft. Harrison Vance is not merely an ambitious businessman seeking mineral rights. He is my half-brother." Nora nearly dropped the letter, the words swimming before her eyes. She steadied herself against the stone wall, forcing herself to continue reading. "My father, Samuel Reeves, had a relationship with Vance's mother years before I was born. Harrison was the result, a son raised in wealth back east, while my father built our more modest life in Wyoming. Few knew of this connection, but I discovered evidence in my father's private papers after his death. Vance learned of his parentage only after his mother passed 5 years ago. With that knowledge came awareness of the Spanish cash's existence, a family secret my father had documented but never exploited. But there is more, Nora. A connection I hesitate to commit to paper, yet must if you are to understand the full scope of this tragedy. You were born Eleanor Vance. Harrison is your father." The lantern light seemed to dim the cavern walls, pressing closer. Nora read the words again, certain she had misunderstood. But Malcolm's handwriting remained clear, unmistakable. "Your mother fled Harrison's cruelty before you were born, changing both your names to escape his influence. She never told you the truth, fearing you would be tainted by the connection. When you and I met, I had no knowledge of this relationship, nor did I realize that in marrying you, I had inadvertently connected 2 branches of a poisoned family tree. I discovered the truth only after seeing your mother's maiden name on documents related to the Spanish land grants. Further investigation confirmed my suspicions. Vance knows. That's why his men have been careful not to harm you directly despite your resistance. That's why he's offered to buy the land rather than simply take it by force. Blood ties bind him even as greed drives him. The cash represents more than just valuable land grants. Some documents contain evidence of criminal activities by Vance's associates in securing territorial approvals, evidence that could destroy his operation and send several officials to prison. I've been gathering additional proof, preparing to expose everything. Perhaps that's why I feel watched lately, why strange men have been seen near our property. If something happens to me, find Gabriel Nordstrom. Despite our differences, he is a man of principle beneath his hardened exterior. He will help you if you mention the Baxter Springs debt. Know that I have loved you with all my heart from the moment we met until my last breath. Whatever blood runs in your veins, you are the most honest, courageous soul I have ever known. Forgive me for keeping these discoveries from you. I only sought to protect you from painful truths until I could resolve this situation. All my love. Malcolm. The letter slipped from Nora's fingers, fluttering to the stone floor. Her mind reeled, struggling to absorb revelations that rewrote not just recent events, but her entire history. Harrison Vance, her father, Malcolm and Vance, half-brothers. Her mother, a woman who had died when Nora was just 20, taking her secrets to the grave. It explains so much: Vance's peculiar restraint, Hargrove's insistence on purchasing rather than seizing the property, even the strange familiarity she had sometimes felt when seeing Vance's likeness in newspaper illustrations. Yet the knowledge brought no clarity, only a deeper sense of displacement. Who was she if not the person she had believed herself to be for 34 years? A sound from the outer chamber jerked her back to the present, footsteps, cautious but deliberate. Nora quickly gathered the documents, stuffing them back into their containers and then into her pack. She extinguished her lantern with a swift movement, plunging the chamber into darkness. Mrs. Reeves. A voicemail unfamiliar echoed from the cavern. I know you're here. Please, there's no need for alarm. Nora pressed herself against the wall beside the entry, her hand on the small revolver Gabriel had given her. A different lantern's glow spilled into the chamber as a figure entered, tall, expensively dressed, with silver at his temples. A face she had seen only in newspaper engravings, yet carried elements that had greeted her in the mirror throughout her life. Harrison Vance. Remarkable, isn't it? He said, apparently addressing the darkness. This chamber has remained virtually untouched for 300 years. He moved further into the room, lantern held high. The Spanish had a profound reverence for sacred spaces. Their miners considered this place touched by God. He turned slowly, his gaze finally settling on Nora's position. There you are. His voice held no triumph, only a strange weariness. I've waited a long time for this meeting, Eleanor. The use of her birth name, a name she hadn't heard since childhood, sent a shock through Nora. How did you find me? She asked, remaining in shadow. Gabriel Nordstrom was kind enough to provide directions. Vance set his lantern on the stone altar. Though not willingly, I assure you. Cold dread bloomed in Nora's chest. What have you done to him? Nothing fatal. Yet. Vance straightened his already immaculate cuffs. His condition depends largely on the outcome of our conversation. Nora stepped forward, allowing the lantern light to illuminate her face. You're my father. If Vance was surprised by her knowledge, he showed no sign. Biologically, yes, though I've hardly earned the title in any meaningful sense. And Malcolm was your half-brother. Indeed, a fact I discovered only after his unfortunate death. Something like regret crossed Vance's features. Had I known earlier, perhaps events might have unfolded differently. You expect me to believe you didn't order his murder? Anger sharpened Nora's voice, cutting through shock and confusion. What I ordered was surveillance, information gathering. Vance's expression hardened. Reed exceeded his instructions, a failing for which he has recently been disciplined. Why any of this? Nora gestured to the chest, the cavern. You have wealth power. What could these old papers possibly matter? Progress requires certainty, Eleanor. Development demands clear title. He moved to the chest, running his fingers along its ancient wood. These documents cloud that certainty. In the wrong hands, they could disrupt projects representing millions in investment, railways, mining operations, entire townships. The wrong hands meaning those with legitimate claim to the land. Nora's grip tightened on the revolver, still concealed in the folds of her skirt. The people your associates cheated and killed? Vance smiled thinly. The march of civilization has always involved adjustments to previous arrangements. He turned to face her directly. I didn't come here to debate morality. I came to offer you a choice. What choice? Join me. Acknowledge your birthright as my daughter and heir. His voice took on an almost persuasive warmth. The Vance holdings extend far beyond Wyoming territory. With your intelligence and resilience qualities I recognize as my own, you could help build something lasting. The offer hung in the air between them, absurd, yet somehow tempting in its promise of resolution of belonging. And if I refuse, then the documents disappear. Nordstrom dies. You return to Coleridge to face charges of trespassing and theft. The warmth vanished from his voice. The territorial judge is a personal friend. The outcome would be unfortunate. Nora studied the man before her, this stranger whose blood ran in her veins. She saw calculation in his eyes, certainty in his bearing. A man accustomed to bending others to his will, to reshaping reality itself to suit his purposes. She thought of Malcolm, whose kindness and integrity had represented everything Harrison Vance was not. Of Gabriel, who had risked his life to help her despite his own demons. Of her mother, who had fled rather than allow her daughter to be raised in Vance's image. No, she said simply. Vance's expression hardened. I don't think you understand the position you're in, Eleanor. I understand perfectly. Nora withdrew the revolver, aiming it steadily at Vance's chest. And my name is Nora Reeves. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps even pride, crossed Vance's face. You would shoot your own father. I would shoot a man who murdered my husband, threatened my friend, and tried to steal my home. Her voice remained calm, her hand unwavering. The accident of blood means nothing compared to that. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Vance's shoulders relaxed slightly, a strange smile playing at his lips. Malcolm chose well, he said quietly. You're more formidable than I anticipated. He glanced at the revolver. But what exactly is your plan? Shoot me in a mine shaft hundreds of feet underground. How would you explain that to the authorities? I don't intend to shoot you unless you force my hand. Nora reached into her pack with her free hand, withdrawing Malcolm's letter. This, along with the Confederate dispatches, provides enough evidence to link you to Malcolm's death and to criminal conspiracy with territorial officials. Papers can be destroyed, Vance countered, witnesses silenced. Copies have been secured elsewhere with instructions for their use should anything happen to me or Gabriel. The lie came easily bolstered by the certainty that it was what Malcolm would have done. You're not the only one who can plan ahead, Mr. Vance. A tense silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the cavern's depths. Vance studied her, reassessing. What do you want? He finally asked. Gabriel Nordstrom unharmed. Clear title to the Reeves property, permanently secured against any future claims. And your operation moves elsewhere, far from the Silverbrook mine and its secrets. And the documents stay with me. Insurance against future interference. Vance laughed softly. You negotiate like a Vance whether you accept the name or not. He considered for a moment. Very well, but I want something in return. What? Silence about our connection. I have other children, legitimate heirs, who would be devastated by such revelations. The request surprised Nora, suggesting a capacity for familial feeling she hadn't expected from him. Agreed. Our blood tie remains private. Then we have an arrangement. Vance extended his hand, a bizarrely formal gesture, given the circumstances. Nora ignored it, keeping the revolver steady. Where is Gabriel? Being held at our main camp. I'll arrange his release once we return to the surface. You first, she said, gesturing toward the chamber entrance. As they made their way back through the Spanish tunnels toward the vertical shaft, Nora maintained a careful distance from Vance. Despite their agreement, she trusted nothing about this man who had orchestrated so much suffering. You know, Vance said as they began the climb up the iron rungs, in another life we might have understood each other quite well, you and I. There's more of me in you than you'd care to admit. Perhaps, Nora conceded, the weight of Malcolm's revelation still pressing upon her. But we're defined by our choices, not our blood. And I've chosen a different path. At the top of the shaft, two of Vance's men waited, not Reed's rough enforcers, but professional-looking guards in company uniforms. Their eyes widened at the sight of Nora's revolver still trained on their employer. "Mr. Vance has decided to respect our property boundaries," she informed them coolly. "We're proceeding to the main camp to collect Mr. Nordstrom." The men looked to Vance, who nodded once. "Do as she says, and send word ahead. Nordstrom is to be released immediately." The walk to the camp took nearly an hour, moving through tunnels that grew increasingly modernized as they approached Vance's operation. Evidence of substantial investment appeared everywhere. New support structures, rail lines for ore carts, elaborate ventilation systems. They emerged from the mine into chaos. The storm had intensified, turning the camp into a muddy quagmire. Men rushed to secure equipment and shelter as a lightning split the sky above. "This way," Vance directed, leading Nora toward a large tent at the center of the operation. Inside a makeshift office had been established, maps covering the walls, a telegraph machine chattering in one corner, and at a desk near the back, head bowed over paperwork. "Maxwell Hargrove," Nora breathed, recognition and rage flooding through her simultaneously. The man looked up, shock registering on his face, as he took in the tableau: Nora, with her revolver, Vance, with his odd expression of resigned respect. "Mrs. Reeves," Hargrove half rose from his chair. "What is the meaning of—" "Sit down, Maxwell," Vance commanded. "Mrs. Reeves and I have reached an understanding, one that unfortunately excludes future mining operations on her property, Ekrontui. But sir, the investment already committed, the territorial approvals will be redirected to our secondary sites." Vance's tone brooked no argument. "Now where is Nordstrom?" Hargrove's face darkened. "In the security tent. But Sir Reed has been questioning him rather enthusiastically. I'm not certain he's in any condition to—" Nora was moving before he finished speaking, pushing through the tent flap into the storm. "Where?" she demanded of a startled worker. The big tent to the north, ma'am," he stammered, pointing. She ran through the downpour mud, sucking at her boots, revolver still clutched in her hand. Behind her, she could hear Vance shouting orders, his own footsteps splashing in pursuit. The security tent stood slightly apart from the others, unmarked, but guarded by two men who straightened at her approach. Before they could react, Vance's voice rang out through the storm. "Let her pass." And inside the scene confirmed her worst fears. Gabriel sat tied to a chair, his face bloodied, head hanging forward on his chest. Before him stood Silas Reed, his massive frame bent, as he hissed questions into Gabriel's ear. "Get away from him," Nora commanded, leveling the revolver at Reed's chest. Reed straightened slowly, a sneer spreading across his brutish features. "Well, well, the widow Reeves, come to rescue your new man." "Step back, Reed," Vance ordered from behind Nora, his voice cold. "You've exceeded your authority for the last time." Confusion crossed Reed's face, followed by dawning comprehension, as he took in Nora's unwavering aim and Vance's expression. "You're letting them go after everything we've done to secure this operation?" "The situation has evolved," Vance replied. "Mrs. Reeves will be retaining her property. We'll be focusing our efforts elsewhere." "Gada Rayer." "Because she points a gun at you." Reed's voice rose incredulously. The great Harrison Vance backing down to a woman. "Careful, Silas." Vance's warning was soft but lethal. Nora ignored their exchange, moving to Gabriel's side. His breathing was shallow but steady, his pulse strong beneath her fingertips. One eye was swollen shut, dried blood crusted at his hairline. "Gabriel," she whispered, "can you hear me?" His good eye opened slowly, focusing on her face with effort. "Nora!" His voice was a rasp. "The documents." "Safe," she assured him, working at the ropes binding his wrists. "We're leaving. Can you stand?" He nodded weakly, struggling to rise as she freed his hands. Behind them, the confrontation between Reed and Vance escalated, their voices nearly drowned by a thunderclap that shook the tent. "You're making a mistake," Reed snarled. "This woman, she knows too much." "She knows exactly what I've allowed her to know," Vance replied icily. "Our arrangement is complete. Your services are no longer required." Reed's hand moved to his holster. "I don't take dismissal well, Mr. Vance." What happened next occurred with shocking swiftness. Vance, despite his refined appearance, moved with the speed of a much younger man. His hand came up holding a small derringer, a gentleman's weapon easily concealed. The shot was lost in another roll of thunder, but its effect was immediate. Reed staggered backward, a look of profound surprise on his face as a crimson stain blossomed across his chest. "Consider that your severance," Vance said coldly as Reed collapsed. Nora stared in horror, supporting Gabriel's weight as he leaned heavily against her. Vance turned to them, tucking the derringer back into his vest pocket with disturbing casualness. "A loose end tied up," he remarked. "No one will question a violent man meeting a violent end, particularly in this weather." His gaze shifted to Gabriel. "Can he travel?" "Yes," Gabriel answered for himself, straightening with visible effort. "Just get us horses." 20 minutes later, they were mounted and moving away from the camp, the storm providing cover for their departure. Vance himself had overseen the arrangements, supplying them with mounts, provisions, and most surprisingly, a signed document recognizing Nora's clear title to the Reeves property. "Insurance," he had explained, handing her the paper, "against any future misunderstandings." As they rode, Gabriel gradually regained strength, though his injuries clearly pained him. They spoke little, focusing on putting distance between themselves and Vance's operation before finding shelter. It was nearly midnight when they reached a trapper's cabin Gabriel knew of, abandoned now, but still offering protection from the relentless storm. Inside, Nora tended his wounds by firelight, cleaning cuts, and binding cracked ribs with strips torn from her petticoat. "I thought I'd lost you," she said quietly as she worked. Gabriel's unswollen eyes studied her face. "You found the cash?" "Yes." She hesitated. "And Malcolm's letter?" Understanding dawned in his expression. "He told you about Vance. You knew shock and betrayal lanced through her. All this time you knew Vance was my father." "No." Gabriel winced as she tightened a bandage. "Not until today, when Reed took particular pleasure in sharing that information during his questioning. But I knew he and Malcolm were half-brothers. Malcolm told me years ago, though, he swore me to secrecy." Nora sat back on her heels, processing this additional layer of revelation. "Why keep it from me? In your journal and all our planning, why not mention this connection?" "Because it wasn't mine to tell." Gabriel reached for her hand, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "Malcolm had his reasons for keeping certain truths buried. I respected that, even after his death." The simple explanation held its own truth. Gabriel, for all his complexity, possessed a fundamental honor: fidelity to promises made even when breaking them might have been easier. "What happens now?" she asked, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. "We rest, recover." Gabriel shifted, making room beside him near the fire. "Tomorrow we secure the documents somewhere safe, a bank in Denver perhaps, where Vance's influence is diluted by competing interests. And then," he looked at her curiously, "then you return to your land, rebuild what was damaged, live the life Malcolm would have wanted for you. And you?" The question emerged more softly than she intended. Gabriel's gaze dropped to the flames. "I move on, as I always have." The statement hung between them, its simplicity belied by undercurrents of regret, uncertainty, possibility. "Is that what you want?" Nora asked. "What I want?" He hesitated, uncharacteristically vulnerable. "What I want hasn't factored into my decisions for a very long time." Nora studied his profile in the firelight, the strength evident even in repose, the weariness etched in lines at the corners of his eye, the scar that traced his temple like a memory given physical form. "Perhaps it should," she said quietly. He looked up, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Nora, I'm not Malcolm. I never will be. The things I've done—" "I'm not asking you to be Malcolm." She moved closer, her hand finding his. "I'm asking you to be Gabriel, whoever that turns out to be." Something shifted in his expression, a lowering of defenses long maintained. "I don't know if I remember how." "Then perhaps we figure it out together." She smiled slightly. "I'm not exactly the woman I thought I was either." Outside, the storm began to abate, rain softening to a gentle patter against the cabin roof. Dawn was still hours away, but its promise hung in the air between them, a new day approaching, unwritten and full of possibility. Gabriel's hand tightened around hers. Not an answer, not yet, but a beginning. 3 months later, Nora stood on the porch of the rebuilt Reeves farmhouse, watching autumn sunlight gild the distant mountains. The damage from Reed's attack had been repaired, the structure renewed, and in some ways improved under Gabriel's careful craftsmanship. He had stayed after all. Not continuously, there had been a journey to Denver to secure the documents, another to testify against one of Vance's corrupt territorial officials. But he returned each time, his absences growing shorter, his presence increasingly woven into the fabric of daily life. They had developed a rhythm, Nora tending the garden and livestock, Gabriel repairing outbuildings, and reinforcing the maintenance shaft of the mine, sealing the deeper tunnels against intrusion. In evenings, they shared meals and conversation, slowly unraveling each other's histories, building understanding, one revelation at a time. They had visited the graves on the hill together, Nora placing wildflowers while Gabriel stood in respectful silence. Later, he had helped her craft a proper marker for Samuel, a small stone angel beside Malcolm's cross. He would have been a fine boy, Gabriel had said quietly. Not empty comfort, but acknowledgement of real loss. Harrison Vance had kept his distance, though regular updates arrived via courier reports on the progress of his relocated mining operation, news of Hargrove's reassignment to company holdings in California, even occasional personal inquiries into Nora's welfare. She never responded directly, but the fact of continued communication represented a strange, tentative connection neither had anticipated. The documents remained secure in Denver, their existence known only to Nora, Gabriel, and Vance himself. A shared secret, a balance of power, an insurance policy against future betrayal. Penny, for your thoughts. Nora turned to find Gabriel in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his face healed, now save for a new small scar near his eye, another mark in a collection that mapped a complex life. Just thinking about how much has changed, she replied. How much remains uncertain? He nodded, understanding. Regrets? No. The answer came without hesitation. Questions, yes. Adjustments to make, but not regrets. Gabriel stepped onto the porch, moving to stand beside her at the railing. In the months since their confrontation with Vance, something had gradually shifted between them. Wariness giving way to trust, distance to proximity, guardedness to a careful, growing affection. I received a letter today, he said after a comfortable silence, from an old colleague at the Pinkerton Agency. They're establishing a new office in Denver, focusing on land fraud cases. They've offered me a position. Nora felt a small constriction in her chest. I see. When would you leave? That depends. His pale eyes held hers. On whether I'd be going alone. The implication hung in the air between them, delicate as spun glass. The Reeves property has been my home for 8 years, Nora said carefully. I've fought for it, bled for it, buried loved ones in its soil. I understand. No pressure in his voice, no expectation, only acceptance. But perhaps, she continued, a home isn't always a fixed point on the earth. Perhaps sometimes it's something we carry with us. She turned to face him fully. Something we build together. Gabriel's expression softened, hope cautiously emerging. Are you saying... I'm saying I'd like to see Denver. Nora smiled, feeling a lightness she had thought lost forever. I'm saying perhaps it's time for both of us to stop living in the shadows of the past. He reached for her hand, his touch conveying what words could not, gratitude, promise a future unwritten, but faced together. As the sun continued its westward journey, painting the Wyoming landscape in amber and gold, they remained on the porch, two people shaped by loss and deception, yet somehow finding their way toward truth, toward each other. The mine with its secrets would remain the documents, with their dangerous knowledge secured far away. Harrison Vance would continue his empire building, perhaps somewhat tempered by the knowledge of what he had nearly destroyed. The dead would rest in their peaceful plot on the hillside, remembered, but no longer binding the living to grief. And Nora Reeves, daughter of secrets, widow of truth, survivor of betrayal, would step forward into an unexpected future, carrying with her the strength forged in darkness, now finally brought to light.